And then, of course, finally, there's the sociological approach, which you can get from any modern sociologist. You can get it from Max Weber. And in this case, class is simply linked to a particular way of life. It's linked to social interactions. It's linked to worldviews. It's linked to their function in society. And so there's not really, for them, talking about the means of production is to totally miss the point. A factory worker doesn't have the same sort of class as an IT worker. One works in a cubicle, one has certain white-collar relationships, one engages in white-collar actions, the other is blue-collar, has certain predilections towards, cheaper beer or, cheap wine, but really beer. Whereas, these rich elites, have essentially a fundamentally different life, a fundamentally different class, and even workers amongst themselves. And so there's this sociological perspective, which attempts to undermine what they see as the easy and vulgar notion of orthodox Marxism. But with all of this information said, I think there's another way to look at class. Most people talk about class as an analysis, as a description of the way in which our world is constituted under capitalism. But I would contend that no analysis remains free of ideological distortion. There is no truth of the matter in this case which is free from a political will, a political ideology. So, I would also argue whatever determining characteristic one decides anchors one's ideological perspective. When one views the interplay of powers as the nature of class distinction, one is making a certain post-structural ideological move. When one sees consumption as the core of one's class, one is making another ideological move. I would argue a capitalistic ideological move. So in this case, I argue the return to orthodox Marxism, not because it's more descriptive, not because it necessarily gives us a predictive ability about what people will do in the future. But I advocate the return to traditional orthodox Marxist class structure as a call to arms. When one says that what it means to be a proletariat is to not have the means of production, one is doing nothing less than asserting that one's economic conditions are necessary for one's freedom. That if one does not control one's economic destiny, one does not control one's life. That one is nothing more than a slave and a serf to those with it, to those who own the means of production. And rather than drawing lines between this sort of life, between the redneck or the barrio dweller or the black projects, that as a political call, we should assert the unity of the proletariat against the bourgeois. That without this assertion, revolutionary action is not only unlikely, it is not only ineffective. That without the assertion of classic orthodox Marxism, revolution is impossible. Thank you very much.
Will you say a quick thing about those classless vagabonds?
Well, under traditional Marxists, Marx asserts that all classes will ultimately be separated into the bourgeois and the proletariat, the capitalist and the worker. But there's classes in between. For example, the petit bourgeois are those who own the means of their own reproduction. Right? So this would be a single shopkeeper who owns that, someone who blows glass, for example, or paints pictures. They don't own necessarily, right, a factory. They don't own other people's labor. They don't buy other people's labor, right? But a handmade cobbler, right, owns the means of his own production. Among the workers, there is another class, at least in the lower spectrum. It's called lumpen proletariat. The Lumpen comes from the German word, I think it's Lumpe, which means rags. But the lumpen proletariat in Marx's time literally meant something along the lines of the criminal workers or the mob. And so in this case, there are people who don't own the means of production as such, but survive as unproductive members. Drug dealers, shoplifters, which is not, again, to necessarily denigrate those actions. But in this case, there's no wider societal function. And in fact, in, I believe it's called the 19th of Brumaire, Marx says that as a matter of fact, the lumpen proletariat are most likely not to join with the workers, but to join with any reactionary leaders who come along and offer them a better deal. And in this case, I believe it was Napoleon III that Marx was talking about, who the lumpen proletariat formed his army. And it's also worth noting, right, Nazi Germany, Mussolini, it's a little bit different because there was a strong military element, but right, Franco, Pinochet, right, all of these people had strong elements among of criminality, right, and a strong base among the criminals. So in this case, right, those idlers, as Marx scornfully refers to them, are known as the lumpen proletariat. Does that answer your question?